What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Earthquake brand auger, and the problem is it's been in storage for a long time, and also it won't start. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this auger. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. So the story on this one is that it was put up in storage some time ago, and the reason was it wouldn't start. They replaced the spark plug and put fresh fuel in it, but of course it still wouldn't start. Now I'm not sure how long it's been in storage, but if there was still fuel in the tank during that time, it means we're going to have carburetor issues. Now we're going to diagnose this as if we don't have any information, because it's the most likely situation when you get a used piece of equipment. One of the first things I want to do is to check to see if we have spark by using a spark checker. You can find these online for just a few dollars. All you have to do is install it in line with your spark plug, pull the rope, and watch for an orange glow in the tester. Just don't forget to make sure the kill switch is in the run position. At the same time, we can feel if the engine has any compression, which is the engine fighting back during the compression stroke. And luckily for us, there was an orange glow in the tester, which means we have a working ignition system. If you didn't see a glow in your tester, then you might have a bad ignition module, or your kill switch might still be grounded when it's not supposed to be. The next thing I want to do is put some fuel into the carburetor's throat so we can do a test run. Fortunately, the engine started and ran for a second, which means we also have enough compression for it to run. But what if it didn't start and run? If that happened, I would use my compression tester to gauge how worn out the engine might be. You'd like to see a reading well over 100 psi, and the higher the better. And if it's lower than that, it just means the engine is worn out to some extent. You do not want to see a number below 50 psi, because it means the engine has some serious problems. Now, since the engine started and ran, I really don't feel a need to use the compression tester. Next, I want to remove the carburetor and inspect it for any problems. Now, to remove the carb, you have to remove these two nuts off the stud that mount it to the engine. However, sometimes these nuts will be on so tight that they loosen the stud. It's not a problem, but it could mean at some point someone may have taken these nuts off, and when they put them back on, may have over-tightened them. Now, after removing the two nuts, you won't be able to remove the fuel tank without removing one more nut and washer on top of the engine. Once you get the fuel tank free, just be very careful, as there's still a very stiff fuel line that needs to be disconnected. I was planning on removing the fuel line from the carburetor, but it wouldn't let go of the plastic adapter on the carb, so I'll just leave it attached, and that way we can remove the last nut from the stud so we can take off the carb. Then we can very carefully disconnect the throttle spring and slide the carb away from the engine. Unfortunately, while I was removing the carb, the fuel line adapter came off. It looks like the outer part has a crack in it, which made it loose. I think I can repair it and use it again, because I don't think they sell this part by itself. Otherwise, I have to replace the entire carb, and I don't know if they sell it anymore because it's a very old piece of equipment. So here's the flap for the governor along with its spring that attaches to the throttle linkage. I've never seen this used on a small two-cycle engine except on older Lawn Boy engines. As for the adapter, I'll try and cut the broken part off and then plastic weld it back together, and hopefully it holds. The first part I want to take off the carb is the pumping side and inspect the inlet screen for any blockages. Now that's very interesting. There's some old two-cycle oil that's pooled up on the side of the carb. I've never seen that before, so it probably means there's more of that in the small passages as well. Now the inlet screen isn't blocked, but there is a small bit of debris on it, so we need to clean that off with some carb cleaner, but only after we take off the needle and rocker arm assembly from the other side of the carb. So this is the pumping diaphragm, and what we're looking for are these two check valve flaps are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. It's easier to figure that out if you look at it from the side. Ours are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm, so that means we can reuse it. However, if yours aren't and bent away from the rest of it, I would consider replacing the carb, as it's just easier, that is if you can find one. Next, I want to remove the metal plate so we can inspect the metering diaphragm. So here's the metering diaphragm, and it's not looking very good. It's not completely petrified, but it's severely deformed. There's a large wrinkle that's going across it and a ring around the edge. Now you could probably still use it the way it is, but it's not going to work like it should. That means we need to replace it. After taking off the old diaphragm, one of the things we need to note is the length of the stem in the middle of this metal wheel. The stem is either long or short, and in this case, the stem is the longer version. So when buying a new diaphragm, look for one with a long stem and 4 holes for the screws. Next, I want to remove the needle and rocker arm assembly, then we can clean the carb with some carb cleaner. Also, be very careful as you can very easily lose these small parts. Now, the diaphragm's gasket needs to be removed so that the needle can be taken out. The reason we need to take it out is that the needle has a rubber tip on it, and if you get carb cleaner on it, it could damage it. So it looks like there's only the L screw for a low engine speed fuel adjustment, as the H screw has been capped off with this white plastic screw. I want to do a decent cleaning on it, so I want to remove both screws, but before taking out the L screw, turn it clockwise and count how many turns it takes to bottom out. After that, we can then remove it and start spraying carb cleaner all over it. Also, make sure when you spray the inlet screen with carb cleaner that it disappears through the screen. This will confirm that fuel will also do the same thing. If it doesn't, keep cleaning the screen till it does. Now that the carb is clean, we'll start to reassemble it. When installing the L screw, turn it clockwise till it stops and then turn it out however many turns you counted before you removed it. Also, when replacing the white plastic cap, don't over tighten it or you're going to break it. After you get the needle and rocker arm assembly back into the carb, press on the arm and make sure that it works like it's supposed to. Next, replace the gasket first, followed by the new metering diaphragm. Now this one has 2 extra tabs for locating, but they won't be used in this application. We just need to make sure that the stem in the middle is the long version, and it should be just fine. After that, replace the pumping side and its bolts. So I cut off the broken part of the adapter and plastic welded what was left of the crack. I pressed it back onto the carb, and it's way tighter than before, so it should hold. Next, I want to replace the old fuel line with some Tygon line and maybe give myself a little bit extra. To make installation a little bit easier, I'll put the fuel line on the carb first and then install the carb back onto the engine. Just make sure you slide the flap under the cover first and then reconnect the throttle spring. Then install it and its gasket on the black insulator. Another reason why this engine might not be starting is that the engine compression is lower than it needs to be. For a 2-cycle engine, you need to mix your oil in your gas, and if that mixture doesn't have enough oil in it, the piston rings will wear faster than they're supposed to. Once the compression gets too low, the engine will have a hard time running or even starting. Once the carburetor is back on the engine, we can now replace the fuel tank, reconnect the fuel line to the tank, then replace the tank on its studs, and then the nuts, then the air filter, and the bolts that hold the filter cover to the tank. Now after that, we can put some fresh fuel in the tank and try starting it. Now I don't know how this engine is going to run when I get it started, so for safety reasons, I'm going to lay it down on its side with the engine higher than the auger bit. There should be enough gas in the tank that the line will still have fuel getting to it. And also, this engine is so old that it doesn't have a self-venting gas cap, so don't forget to open the vent on top of the cap before you try to start it. So it started, but it's having a tough time running and it eventually dies. More than likely, we're going to have to make some adjustments, but just to be sure, let's try that one more time. Now, it's still acting the same way, so we need to start making our adjustments, but unfortunately, we have a serious problem. It looks like there's a fuel leak, so we need to figure out where the leak is coming from. Otherwise, we might have a huge fire on our hands. If the leak is coming from the carburetor, we might have to call it a day because we may not be able to replace it. After taking the fuel tank off, the leak appears to be coming from the adapter I tried to fix, so apparently it didn't hold. There's one possible fix for this situation, or at least a bandage, which is to remove the adapter and put the fuel line on what's left over, which is a ribbed metal piece that's about 1/8 of an inch long. Now, the fuel line fits very tightly on the metal piece, and using the clamp, I think will hold, or at least long enough till we find another solution. After unclamping the fuel line, it wasn't leaking anymore, so I think we're good. And as for the adjustments, I think we need to add some fuel, so I'm going to turn the L screw counterclockwise half a turn, but then when adding fuel with the L screw, you need to turn the idle screw clockwise to keep the idle high enough so the engine doesn't die. So it looks like the fuel line isn't leaking anymore and the engine isn't dying like before. I know I didn't make a very deep hole, and that's because with a camera in the way, I don't feel very comfortable till I can get in a better position. After filming though, I did make a much deeper hole and it worked just fine. Now remember to thoroughly test the auger doing what it's supposed to do, so that way when you get it out into the field, it works just like it's supposed to. So my question is, what should I do about that broken fuel line adapter? Should I try and find a replacement part, or maybe an entire carburetor? Or should I just leave it the way it is? Personally, I think it'll hold because of how tight the tie gun line was on the metal piece and the clamp that I'm using. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.